Okay, so today's Monday, November 18th, 2024. It is a lovely day here in eastern Pennsylvania. Temperatures have been around the low 60s. I had a wonderful weekend. On Friday, I had the opportunity to meet up with our friend Tim, who's a friend to this channel, and he also runs a very interesting company that is probably one of the largest makers of commercial refrigeration hardware in North America, certainly, if not the world. And it's very, very interesting to take a look at some of their products. I always enjoy visiting with Tim. So Tim, if you're watching this, it was great seeing you on Friday. Okay, so taking a look at the markets, I noticed that shares of Bitfarms were down, and at last check, they were down close to 5%. Now, something I always like doing, and I love sharing this because I think it bears repeating, whenever shares of a company we are interested in seem to be doing poorly on a particular day, I always like to look at the peer group, right? So in this instance, expanding out from just Bitfarms itself and looking at other publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies, I can see that pretty much everybody is down today. And so that immediately then provides a bit of context and perspective as to what's going on with shares of Bitfarms. This is something I used to do all the time with shares of Stronghold Digital Mining, which of course are continuing to trade, right? The acquisition by Bitfarms has not as of yet been consummated, so shares of SDIG are still out there, of course. So, whenever you see that other companies within the sector are doing poorly, at least it immediately kind of sort of like sets aside any concern that it's a company specific thing. It would be a very different story, right, if shares of Bitfarms are down and then we see everybody else pretty much is up. Then it's kind of like, okay, what's going on with Bitfarms specifically, right? Because they're sort of bucking the trend to the downside. Speaking of trends and speaking of share prices, I think it bears repeating, right, that RIOT Platforms owns, I think, just under 20% of Bitfarms. Now, that's a catalyst, or at least a potential catalyst, for shares of Bitfarms that I think is kind of extraordinary. RIOT, whether you love the company or hate the company, hey, they're a presence in this industry, okay? A fairly large presence with a very, I would argue, meaningful market capitalization, as well as, I think, a bit of a history, right, of attempting to really just be one of the biggest operators in the space. So having a company with that predisposition, owning a substantial portion of Bitfarms, naturally raises the question, hey, although there's sort of a bit of what I would describe, at least from my perspective, as an uneasy truce, right, that has sort of settled as between the companies, I do think that the potential exists in the future for there to be another attempt by RIOT to acquire all of the rest of Bitfarms that it doesn't own. So I think that to some degree, I don't want to say it underpins, the price of Bitfarms shares, right? Because look, at anything can happen, right? You could have a lot of turmoil in the markets, right? That send shares lower regardless of however many shares RIOT owns. But the point I'm making, though, is that I think just from a psychological perspective, just from an operational perspective, look, if RIOT wants to really just expand dramatically, almost overnight, their size, well, it's sure a heck of a lot easier to take a look at Bitfarms, right? You already own close to 20% of the company. You love what they're doing. You love some of the optimizations that have been announced, right? I've been listening to the most recent quarterly conference call. I'm going to do that a few more times. But, hey, Bitfarms is doing some really impressive things to optimize the fleet, to expand their capacity, right? And although there has been a bit of a setback insofar as some of the guidance, right, regarding reaching 21 exahash, in terms of, hey, maybe it's going to be closer to like Q1 2025, maybe not so much year-end 2024, but still, hey, from the perspective of a company like RIOT, you can pretty much say, hey, you know what, let's pay the price. We're going to get these assets. All the work has largely been done. It's just a matter of turning the key, and it's kind of like ours now. And hey, we've now grown substantially as a result of an acquisition like this. Am I saying that's something that I'm predicting is going to happen in the very near future? Not necessarily, no. But I do think it's something that bears mentioning over and over again because it's easy to forget. That's right. Bitfarms has a substantial, very substantial shareholder in RIOT Platforms. Now, as I alluded to last week, I still continue to believe that there's going to be a lot of turmoil and just upheaval in the markets. I think the potential for that exists. Now, certainly today's an interesting day in the Bitcoin mining ecosystem where you have some companies are down substantially today. In fact, if you look, the rally that took place after the, American election, right, on November 5th, 2024, like a lot of the gains that took place within the Bitcoin mining ecosystem have largely been given back. Not entirely, right? But a lot of those gains have kind of evaporated. So, Bitfarms is still trading above $2 a share. And, somebody mentioned in the comments, I'm going to sort of like butcher this if I don't read it verbatim. It was words to the effect of, well, now, of course, I can't find it, which is, of course, the way it tends to work out when you're looking for something. Oh, here it is. It's right at the top. Just bought more shares again, 20,000 shares at $2.11 a share. That was 23 minutes ago. That comment was made. Hey, that can very well prove to be a phenomenal entry point to shares of Bitfarms. I still think the potential exists, right, that, hey, we may conceivably see shares drop down below $2 again. But if that were to take place, not only, first of all, is it, I think, an interesting entry point to contemplate, but I don't necessarily think that we'd necessarily linger under $2 for very long. And by the way, keep the comments coming. I read everything. Sometimes I'm not in a position to respond right away, but I really, really appreciate hearing your insights and perspectives regarding what's going on. Because I just find it very useful and interesting. And by the way, somebody mentioned, and I just wanted to chime in regarding this, do you think it still makes sense to buy Stronghold shares or just switch to Bitfarms? So if you don't actually own shares of Stronghold or in Bitfarms, and you're debating as to which of the two companies would make the most sense to allocate capital to right now, from my perspective, and I see that my perspective is shared to some degree by some of the folks in the comments, right? Hey, I just stick with Bitfarms. And the reason I'm saying that is if in the off chance, this acquisition doesn't go through, which I have no reason to believe it won't go through, okay? But in the rare event it were not to go through, I don't know where that leaves shares of Stronghold Digital Mining. Right, I think it really puts the company on its back heels a little bit to then have to scramble to figure out how to proceed forward. I do recall, of course, we all probably recall that there was that $250 million universal shelf offering that was submitted to the SEC for vetting. Right, I'm not entirely sure where what the status of that is. But presumably, right, in the event that the acquisition were to not go through, suddenly Stronghold's going to find itself more than likely having to tap not only its existing ATM, right, but potentially tap new sources of funding in an effort to kind of keep itself kind of moving in the right direction. Again, I don't anticipate there being any problem with the acquisition, going through, but I would probably in this instance be more inclined to just apply fresh capital directly to Bitfarms, not so much to Stronghold. Just simply from the perspective that, hey, at the end of the day, it's going to be Stronghold, or rather it's going to be Bitfarms, right? You might say to yourself, well, hey, but isn't there still a gap that exists between the fully, hey, what is it, $2.11 a share? Is that where it was trading just a moment ago? I don't have a calculator immediately in front of me, but let's just do the math right now. Let me pull this up. So if we take 2.11 and multiply that by 2.52, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the conversion ratio, right? Once the acquisition takes place, that would value shares of Stronghold Digital Mining right now at $5.31. I mean, the last time I updated this one screen here, shares of Stronghold were trading at $5.25. So, I mean, somebody might say, hey, but, can I potentially exploit that little gap that still exists? I mean, you could, but again, I don't think that rationale outweighs the potential downside if for some reason there's some issue with the acquisition going forward, right, or going through. So bottom line, I just stick with buying shares of Bitfarms at this point. If you have not purchased shares in Stronghold previously and you're trying to figure out, like, hey, which of the two entities makes the most sense to get involved with. So, okay, my friend, it's going to be a very busy week. I've continued to work diligently on the updated dashboard. I'm going to go back to working on that right now, in fact. I encourage you to definitely spend some time outdoors if you have the opportunity to do so, regardless of where you are in the world. I find that it is so incredibly refreshing to sometimes, step away from the news, right, or other inputs that are not necessarily really, I think, right for me, certainly, or may not be right for you, to just tune all that noise out and to just spend some time outside. That can be very refreshing and just kind of reset one's day. So consider doing that if the weather or your wardrobe permits for that. I think there's a phrase in Germany that there's no such thing as bad weather, just a bad choice of wardrobe. And I like that because I think it encourages the idea of just going outside, regardless of the weather, just making sure that you're dressed appropriately. Okay, with all of that said, let's stay positive, let's be great, and we'll see each other again tomorrow.